Revolutionary greetings, folks. This is Victor Coronado alongside Carlos Cruz Mosquera and Nick Ayala. Comrades, how we doing?
All good, comrade.
Good. This is ANTICONQUISTA. You can check us out at anticonquista.com. Please like, please share, please subscribe. Please consider donating, as the money that we receive, we actually send back out to the diaspora, to Latin America. And again, consider donating. You can also check us out on other social media platforms: Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and the likes. So this is now episode 7 of Nuestra America, Our America, where we bring to you headlines and reports, out of things that are happening in Latin America. And we're gonna get right into it. Starting off with Peru. Pedro Castillo was elected. The elections were finally authenticated. He had his inauguration. He's named some members to his cabinet. He gave his inaugural speech, which caused the markets to react, caused a depreciation in the Peruvian currency, and this week we titled we put out a little propaganda piece to promote this weekly episode, stating that he has what did we title it? The capitalist world shook. Carlos, you wanna go ahead and elaborate and expound on that?
Yeah, I mean, if we all look at Western media today, the Latin American section, you see, again, as we were saying in the last episode, alarm bells. It's alarm bells for them, and it's alarm bells for us, but in a good way. It doesn't mean that what Castillo's doing in Peru is very courageous. It gives us hope. But it doesn't mean that because he is doing he's doing the right things in terms of representing his people, Peruvian people, and Latin Americans. The ordinary Latin Americans. It's a good example. However, there's a lot of propaganda. There's a lot of blockages that are starting to happen in Peru and internationally as well. We see that, of course, the investors are the stock markets and so on are showing showing their colors and not giving Castillo any and basically scaring people is what they're doing by stopping the investments and playing around with the stock market and so on. What they're doing is they're showing no confidence for Castillo and his government with just weeks in power. So even before he started to implement any policies, they're already showing that they're going to attack Castillo and his cabinet. So yeah, I mean, I don't know. Like, there's a lot of propaganda out there. There's a lot of propaganda around his cabinet, which I think is the thing people are focusing on, and rightly so. The cabinet that he's proposed and that he's elected, the majority of them are respected leftists. Some of them, I think, for reasons of having to accommodate somewhat the opposition. I think the finance minister, what's his name? Surname Frank, I think his name is. He did compromise there, but the majority of the other important cabinet positions were given to leftists, Peruvian leftists who have a good record, and who want to change stuff. Principally, it's I forget his first name as well. I think his surname is Guido, who's quite a cool character for us on the left, a socialist. He's proposing a new constitution to replace the Fujimori constitution. So yeah, those are like really important changes. But again, like Guido is being attacked left, right, and center by Western media, being called a homophobe, being called saying he apologizes. He's in a supporter of Sendero Luminoso, which is a bit extreme. He simply stated that he wasn't against some of the ideals of the Sendero Luminoso, without necessarily condoning, some of the stuff that did happen. And to show, I guess, what they're actually doing at the moment is that one of the other ministers, and I think it's the security minister, if I'm not mistaken, was an actual ex-guerrilla fighter for, I think, the Ejército de Liberación Nacional. And they haven't gone after him, even though, in their eyes, he would be, he would be the target to be called a terrorist or a sympathizer of terrorists. He was a guerrilla fighter himself. But they're not going after him. They're going after Guido because he represents, I guess, a more a threat to the establishment, mainly because of his push towards this new constitution, which will severely limit the power of the elites. So yeah, I mean, I don't know. It's something that we as Latin Americans in the diaspora need to, again, like focus on, look out for. We need to, be sure that we're ready to defend Castillo and his government. He's doing basically what Ollanta Humala couldn't do, what Ollanta Humala didn't have the courage to do when he came to power. He was promising a lot of the things that Castillo is actually starting to implement in his government. So yeah, again, like we need to keep our eyes out on it and make sure that we defend Castillo and his administration.
Yeah, and just to like piggyback off what Carlos said, the you can see the mobilizations already against Castillo and Lima. They've already had a large, or not a large, but they have had multiple right-wing demonstrators rally outside of Lima calling for Castillo's resignation. I'm not even sure if it's not even been a month yet, and they're already demanding that he step down. So, the imperialists are already organizing and preparing to gear up for essentially a war. Maybe not an outright war, but an economic war. Nothing. It doesn't have to be a physical or violent war, but it is going to be a war against Castillo and the Peruvian economy. I wouldn't be surprised if we see the same strangling techniques that are being used against Venezuela and being used against Bolivia, against Peru. I mean, we've already seen the currency get depreciated, like Victor said. But I think what's more important is, or not what's more important, but another important aspect to it is like the foreign policy that Castillo's already talking about implementing. He's already mentioned the trying to build closer ties and better relations with China. So you're seeing them take a step similar to, again, what Venezuela, Cuba, and Bolivia are doing. And so we're seeing that, this is really what I think the U.S. imperialists and the U.S. corporations fear. Isn't so much that these socialists are getting into power, but that there's socialists who are getting into power and moving all of, moving the concerns towards developing their country. And in order to develop their country, they're leaning on allies that aren't the U.S. or isn't Europe. It's China, it's Russia, it's even other Latin American allies like Cuba. And that's going to be, I think, the biggest concern, because the U.S. has already been preparing for this kind of Cold War against China and Russia. So that's interesting. It's going to be interesting to see how that develops.
Yeah, and stepping out of the Lima group,
Right.
just the other day as well is a big signifier for all of us that what Castillo is doing is really heading in the right direction for us, for Latin Americans, for Peruvians, kind of giving back Peru its actual independence rather than being the puppet of the US. And it's important because there's the Lima group is named after the Peruvian capital city. So yeah, that's I'm not surprised that the West and the US particularly is on high alert.
Absolutely, and he's seemingly pushing all the right buttons, and he's doing all the right things. He's doing all the things we were hoping he was going to do. And again, this puts the U.S. imperialism in a very precarious position, right? Consider that the July 11th was for all intents and purposes was a total disaster. Era para show, right? That was a big ass fucking show where people were, of course, let's be clear also that people's lives were impacted by this, right? Because of this again orchestrated failed coup attempt, if you will, in Cuba. So consider that just happened. Consider that right before that, the UN voted against the embargo for the 30th year in a row, and the U.S. only had one other vote to vote with them, and that was Israel. So literally the entire world is against the blockade, right? The entire world is saying, please end this ruthless, illegal criminal blockade against Cuba. Then you get July 11th. Then you get the inauguration of Castillo. And then it was just an onslaught of, it was just all the support just started coming in, right? From Bolivia to Venezuela. And then you see the moves that Castillo is making. So that, again, the United States with this is now playing with a different type of power, is now having to go up against a different type of power that exists in Latin America. And so Pedro Castillo, in that sense, now integrating him into this movement that's been happening again over the last 20 some odd years, we have to be hopeful and excited about and supportive of. So I would encourage it. So we put up a couple pieces here. I would encourage folks, if you Google Chicago Alba Solidarity, you'll find the entire Pedro Castillo inaugural speech. I encourage folks to read that. When you read it, again, it just doesn't. It reads like a very progressive, socialist, forward-thinking president, right?
Or listen to it. Listen to it,
right.
because a lot of people might not have time to read the whole speech, but it's easier to listen to while we're doing work and stuff. So, and yeah, it's a great speech. And yeah, go ahead. Sorry, Victor.
No, you're right. Absolutely. Listen to it, read it. But we wanted to highlight Peru for a reason. This is really, really exciting news for the region. Really exciting news for this revolutionary socialist movement that we have going on in Latin America. Him saying, fuck the Lima group. I mean, that's just another one that's just like, yes, good job. We gotta commend that, right? Some of the other exciting stuff that I'm seeing that's connected to this. Obviously when Peru has a big indigenous population, and so just again, I mentioned it last week. I mentioned it again this week. Check out what Evo Morales has been posting and stuff like that. Something else that we often, even myself, I'm guilty of this, is not considering also the indigenous communities that are in our Latin American region and Caribbean. And so those groups need to be empowered, right? And so this is not only significant just for for all Peruvians and for our revolutionary socialist movement, but to the indigenous community. And so that's extremely exciting. This group has been essentially invisible, right, for a long time, and purposefully, right? People, this is
You're breaking up, Victor.
Victor, you're breaking up. As we wait for Victor to come back, I was also thinking that Peru I don't think it's given enough credit in terms of the political contributions, theoretical contributions. Like Jose Carlos Mariátegui is to me, and I guess to many of us at ANTICONQUISTA and many Latin American Marxists, Jose Carlos Mariátegui is the Latin American Marxist that kind of has influenced the most radical sections of our movement. So it's like Jose Carlos Mariátegui's people, his country are finally about to see, hopefully, a change that he was pushing for, and that's big for us. And also, you know, Peru is just like historically is being just like Brazil, Colombia, Chile, where the right wing elites have so much power. So to have Peru now swing so far to the left so quickly is, you know, is important. But again, also as we have said in other shows as well, we have to be cautious as well because of the blocks that we're gonna start seeing in Parliament and Congress in Peru. We know that his cabinet has to be approved by the Congress, which is dominated by right-wing parties. I do know that. So what they can do in Congress, the right wingers, what they can do in Congress is they can disapprove of the cabinet twice. And then Castillo will have the option the first time they vote, they disapprove of his cabinet. If they do, which is possible, he can kind of negotiate with them, compromise a little bit, bring in new people, or not accept it. And if they disapprove the second time round, what can happen is that Castillo can call for elections, which will mean that people can elect, you know, what they want in Congress. And if what they want is real change in Castillo, then they'll vote in politicians who are in line with Castillo. And if they want a continuation of the suppressive right wing elite politicians who they've had for decades and historically, then that's what they will get. But hopefully, and it's not in the Congress's interest to disapprove completely Castillo's cabinet, because then it means that they will be there's a possibility that they could be voted out. So hopefully there's some compromise there, and Castillo's able to move forward with at least most of the cabinet that he's already chosen.
Yeah, and I think that's interesting that you mentioned that. First, I want to talk about Mariátegui and the indigenous communities. Like Victor was saying, I think it's important because you see that history of socialism in some indigenous communities was intrinsically tied to the indigenous resistance, where they utilize socialism as well as applied to their own context to create their own kind of like Latin American socialism. And that's what we're seeing now with Castillo. And I think that is important. But at the same time, I want to go back to what you said, Carlos, about the elections coming up and how these processes work, if they approve his cabinet, if not. I think that's really important to keep in mind, and to keep in mind if we could figure out those dates of if those elections ever do occur, because the way I see it, every election is another opportunity for the reactionaries, for the imperialists to cheat, to fix the results, to, you know, kick him out of power, or at least severely limit or reduce his power, depending on who gets in his cabinet. And you've already seen, you know, we mentioned this, we touched on this a little bit, but he's given some concessions, right? He's appointed a finance minister who's known to be a moderate. The guy was he was formerly an economist for the World Bank. So, you know, he's no radical sendero luminoso, you know, guerrilla fighter. He's a capitalist economist who, you know, he has as a finance minister, and he acknowledges that, right? He acknowledges that this is one of my compromises, but at the same time, you know, there's I want to say he's going to try to force concessions on both sides, because at the same time they're eyeing things like nationalizing the natural gas sector, right? Which would be pretty powerful, given the importance of natural gas in Peruvian economy. But you know, these are things that I think are important to keep in mind, because like I said, every election, every opportunity that the reactionaries and the imperialists get, they'll try to seize in order to, you know, turn his either his cabinet and his administration, whether from the inside or from the outside, turn it more right wing. right? Or at least like stifle the progress it can make. And
the thing is also the opportunity for externally the people themselves. We saw it with Chavez. When Chavez came into power, he of course had very radical lefty ideas, but he was trying to take it slowly because he understood there's a level of compromise when you're dealing with these capitalist democracies, these state structures. There's a level of compromise you have with these elites. Otherwise, they'll get rid of you easy.
Right.
So he was compromising to begin with, and it was the people when the coup happened in 2002. We all know that at that point when the people were like, "There's no way you're going to get rid of Chavez," and they put him back in power. The people put him back in power. It was at that point that Chavez and the Bolivarian Revolution took advantage of that moment and were like, you know what, we have the mandate of the people, and hopefully that's what happens with Castillo. Like the more these people push back, the more they want to block what Castillo's trying to do. Hopefully the people will defend Castillo, and eventually we will have something like a Bolivarian revolution in Peru, where the people talk, where the people make the decisions of defending Castillo and making sure that he stays in power.
Right. And I like that you mentioned Venezuela, because that reminds me too. One thing that we got to be on the lookout for in the diaspora when folks like Castillo get into power is the Peruvian reactionaries now fleeing or coming to the States, or even just becoming more visible. So their voices are going to be amplified. Expect to see a bunch of right-wing Peruvian Americans on the news all the time.
Right.
What is it like? Going to Congress and having politicians try to do outreach to them, just like how Trump does to the Cuban Americans and the Venezuelan Americans who are all anti-socialists. It's going to be the same thing, and it'll be Democrats and Republicans who appeal to this new right-wing Latin American diaspora group. So I think, and just the thing with Venezuela reminds me, because I always remember talking to a Venezuelan American who talks about the 2002 coup, talks about how his mother watched Chavez get put back into power, and she started crying out of fear because she was so afraid of Chavez, and she couldn't believe that this authoritarian was put back into power. How could the people support him? And then she fled the country. So it's like these are going to be the narratives now with Castillo. This dictator took over power. He cheated in the election, and now he's ruling with an iron fist. So we gotta, I think, on our end, we gotta be prepared to fight those narratives, because that's what's gonna come next.
It's happening now. Fujimori's on a campaign right now to again. Denouncing communism, and communism has taken over the country, and we're going to have a dictatorship and all. I mean, it's happening now. It's already happening. Like as we just stated, there were a couple hundred people who were protesting. He hasn't even done anything yet. Like, what has he done to earn a protest? He hasn't. He literally just got in. What can you possibly be protesting?
Right.
Yeah. And you see how they're distorting those protests as well. I saw a shot from like a drone shot of the protest, and it was, I don't know, maybe 1,000 people, tops 2,000 people. Right. I mean, 2,000 a protest of 2,000 people. It's and again, as you guys are saying, like what are they protesting about? They haven't given him the chance to even implement any of these policies.
Right.
So it's ridiculous.
Again, let's be clear. This has never happened before in Peru. So the bourgeoisie, they're not going to just say, yeah, go right ahead, take power away from us. It doesn't work that way. This is a game. And, I just wanted to touch on something else that you folks said. The fact that he provided that one concession with the economy minister. So again, governing, much like electoral politics, is a game of chess. It would be very concerning. It would be very concerning if he had named a bunch of moderates to his cabinet and one hardcore leftist. The opposite happened. So my hopes and what I believe is going to happen is that economy minister, he's going to be influenced by his environment, not the other way around. He's not going to be able to influence that environment because he's just one person. And guess what? If contradictions arise, guess who's going to be out, right? It's going to be him, right? So yes, it was a concession. And again, you know, there was a market reaction. And again, Castillo's not going in there saying, he's never said, you know, we're going to nationalize all the industries and we're going to liquidate the bourgeoisie. He didn't say any of that. You know, these are going to be baby steps in the right direction, and the bourgeoisie is freaking out, right? Because they don't want to concede and they don't want to cede any power, right? So, but yeah. Any other thoughts about Peru?
I think there will be a potential now for, you know, we see all these imperialist international groups collapsing. The OAS, AMLO came out and denounced them, and not just AMLO, multiple leaders came out denouncing them. Lima Group is literally, they can't even function in Lima anymore. So I think there's and also a lot of these nations are now showing solidarity with other Latin American nations like Bolivia, like Venezuela, like Nicaragua. I think there's a potential now for a serious Latin American cooperative international organization. And you know, you could point to some that kind of already exist, like ALBA, which are doing really good work. And I think now is almost like a power vacuum is opening up in Latin America, where our people can work in solidarity and cooperation, right? Even with outside other international actors like Russia and China, or even Iran, and work with these nations in order to really combat U.S. imperialism in Latin America. And you know, once you start building those foundations, then you can start getting longer lasting kind of legacies, where you get, instead of just one, you know, recently what we've seen in the 21st century is we've seen, you know, a Lula, a Dilma, and then a Bolsonaro, or, you know, basically a social democrat, you know, maybe a social democrat or a socialist, and then a far right wing fascist, and then going back to a social democrat. And so these ebbs and flows, we don't really want that. What we want is, you know, the best case scenario would be a Castillo after a Castillo after a Castillo, you know, a progressive leader after another, and to really just eventually push the right wing out of the politics, because those are the ones who are the compradors. Those are the imperialist lackeys who are doing the work in our region for the U.S. And so we have an opportunity now to really push them out, but that's only going to be through solidarity.
So
right, yeah, and, you know, I would add that we, you know, and echo what Nick was saying. Like, you know, this is an important moment for Latin America, particularly like Peru. I think is important historically. So just like Colombia, like I said before, Colombia, Brazil, and Chile, where the elites are so powerful, and now really like what we're starting to see is that the people are actually empowered through Castillo. So yeah, you know, it's an important moment for Latin America, and I think that in order to avoid what Nick was saying in terms of the ebb and flows of, you know, having somebody quite radical and then you know, and then getting somebody like Bolsonaro, like what happened in Brazil, in order to start avoiding those kind of things, the people, I guess, are gonna have to push their elected democratic presidents like Castillo to like what they're trying to do: change the constitution, change state structures so that it limits the power of the elites, it limits the power of capital, of private business, and so on, indefinitely and for good, hopefully. And that's what you know, we hope to see in Peru. It's not going to happen, like, you know, like Nick was saying as well. It's not going to happen overnight, and Victor was saying as well. It's not going to happen overnight. In Peru, it's going to take some time. The finance minister is not great. Like he's I would say a social democrat who's very much a capitalist. So, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they're not going to make strides towards, you know, in the next few years, nationalizing the economy, and making sure that the material, the economy is based around serving the people rather than what we see in the capitalist nations elsewhere. So yeah, I mean, it's a good start, and it's something to be hopeful. But again, like, we have to be cautious, and we do have to, as a diaspora, have to make sure that we're on alert as well. Just as the West is on alert in terms of what Castillo's doing, we have to be on alert too. We have to combat the propaganda with our own propaganda, and we have to. And also, as Anticonquista, we send funds, and if we have to send funds to Peru to try and help out as well, then we need to look into that as well. So yeah, we will have to be on high alert, I think.
Absolutely. I just I put up this Reuters article here. Latin America's resurgent left and Caribbean spurring U.S. policy on Cuba. Just to highlight it, I think it's just always interesting how when you go through Western media outlets and you just start reading some of the headlines, it's just even sometimes they have to acknowledge some of the either some of the bullshit or some of the realities, right? So because you can't deny some of this stuff as much as you try. It's interesting. The last couple of weeks, just listening to a lot of the Gusanos, it's like they're completely oblivious to the fact that there's a revolution happening in Latin America. Like they're talking about Cuba, and yet Cuba is the reason, right? Part of the reason, I don't want to say the only reason, but a big part of the reason why the rest of the region is going in the direction it's going. And it's like there's this complete disconnect. It's like, here we are, we're defending Cuba for all of its accomplishments, and the rest of Latin America sees it and says, yes, we want the same thing. We want the same thing, right? We want safe streets, we want free education, we want free healthcare. We want our people to be educated about our own history. We don't want to be invaded by the imperialists in any way, right? Economically, culturally, so on and so forth. That we want the same thing, and there's just a complete disconnect by the Gusanos. It's like it's laughable. It's like they're like living in this delusional world. It's just interesting. Anything else on Peru or this topic here before we move on? Fellas, no?
No.
Okay. So let's get to some of the other headlines here. Nick, you're gonna actually I'd like to hear your thoughts on this, because I believe you said you talked about this with I'm not sure if you got to do it with Press TV, but the Mexican government is suing several U.S. gun manufacturers and distributors, essentially claiming they are responsible. The manufacturers and distributors responsible for the violence brought by drug cartels and criminals. The lawsuit was filed in Boston. The Mexican government gave the United States government a heads up before filing the lawsuit. Nick, any thoughts on this?
Yeah, it's an interesting case. Obviously, I think we'd all agree the legal avenues aren't always the best, but they do make some. You could make some good progress through legal means, but it's not going to be like a revolutionary overhauling a whole system. What Mexico is doing here is basically they're going after U.S. gun companies because they're tying they've actually been able to trace back some of the guns that they found from criminals and cartels back to U.S. gun manufacturers like Colt and different. I think
Smith and Wesson, Barrett, Colts, yeah. Glock.
Yeah, so all the major gun corporations and manufacturers, essentially. And one of the things that they said that they found was that in 2019, there were more Mexican citizens who were killed by U.S. guns than U.S. citizens. And that's because, again, just the rampant violence and I guess high amount of crime. But the Mexican government is saying that this is a market, a huge black market for these corporations, and it's true. And I think it's a little bit tough to prove that in court, only because you need to have such concrete evidence and prove like they have to make very clear connections. And so it'll be interesting to see what comes out in those connections. But what I've been able to find is that, they have admitted that the black market in terms of illegal guns and selling of weapons makes up about $127 million for a lot of these corporations. So it's a substantial amount of money. And a lot of the ways that this usually works is that usually you'll have someone who could purchase the weapons legally. So they'll purchase the weapons legally and then they'll sell them illegally as a third party seller to, whoever might be interested, usually criminal elements. So a lot of this is, it's just kind of forming right now. It's unique in that this case was very similar cases were brought up in the early 2000s. I don't know if y'all remember, but in the early 2000s in the United States, a bunch of U.S. cities were suing the U.S. Were suing these same gun companies because essentially they were saying that there's been an increase in gun violence, and that gun violence can be directly attributed back to all of these manufacturers. And we as a city have to spend money on police, on security, on hospitals and ambulance services, all these different services that come with increase in violence. And so all these U.S. cities sued these manufacturers, these gun manufacturers, and they actually won their cases. They won millions of dollars from these corporations. So what these corporations decided to do, they went to Congress and they got a rule or a law passed that basically said that they cannot be held liable for any violence that comes from the purchase or selling of their weapons. But that only pertained to the United States. So Mexico is now doing this on an international level. And that's what kind of makes this a little bit unique, a little interesting. But it goes, I think, hand in hand with imperialism. Because think about what the stereotypical kind of guerrilla fighter that we have left over from like the 80s, a media that kind of covers the 80s or in the 70s during the Cold War. What do we imagine? We imagine like a guerrilla fighter with an AK-47 or with some Russian or Eastern European made weapons. Well, nowadays, the biggest exporter of weapons is the United States, right? Over, I think, something like 37% of all weapons and of all weapons exports are coming from the United States. We're giving weapons to, terrorists, jihadists in the Middle East, to terrorists in Asia, in Africa, in Latin America. Our weapons are now the most common weapons throughout the world. If you're going to see a rifle, if you're going to get a rifle in the black market, it's going to be most likely an American rifle or some version of that. So this is kind of, it shows the change, especially when it comes to imperialism, the change from the Cold War to now, where the driving force of a lot of the violence around the world is the primary imperialist power, which is the U.S. So, it's an interesting case. It really, in my opinion, it gets at the root cause of a lot of these issues, right? The root cause of these criminal elements that exist in most of these countries is really imperialism. It's really the U.S. It's not even, most of the time, it's not even what the specific country is doing. It's not Mexico. There's a lot of corrupt politicians, obviously, that have their hands in the drug cartel, but those drug cartels, for the most part, stem from and come out of the demand that arises in the United States for those drugs, for that material, and they're getting funded and armed by that same nation. So you're muted.
No, I was thinking about this earlier today. What's interesting about that, and by the way, when you were talking about the legal precedent before, the counter argument, Mexico saying, well, that doesn't apply to us because, So, but I was just thinking about this earlier in terms of, if you will, global markets and trade and importing, exporting, whether we're talking about illegal or legal markets. The United States has a drug problem. Latin America often produces a lot of these drugs, right? They don't have how often do we see actual drug problems like in Latin America? Like the people, Latin Americans actually have an actual drug problem. Like it's, I don't hardly see those headlines, right? I'm not saying it doesn't exist. I'm just saying that we're the ones that have the drug problem. So there's a demand here for drugs, right? And then you take this issue and what are we doing? The United States is exporting, right? Again, whether legally or illegally, exporting guns to help, create this chaos in Latin America. I mean, it just paints this. It doesn't. Let's just say it doesn't look well for the United States, right? We're here saying, hey, give us your drugs, and we're gonna give you guns, right?
Right.
It's just, and so that was just one observation I had. It's just unbelievable that a lot of the stuff doesn't get, put in this, in this context. But that's what's happening. That's what's happening.
Right. And they're giving. It's interesting to point. They're giving guns to both sides. So they're giving weapons to the cartels, and then they'll also give weapons and training to Mexico and the security, the police, the military. And it's not just Mexico, right? They do the same in Colombia. They do the same in Brazil. They do the same everywhere. And that's why there's such a proliferation of U.S. weapons everywhere, because we're just funding and giving weapons to everyone and anyone. Everything is a profit, right? Everything is a profit.
One detail that I'm not sure if Nick has mentioned this, but one detail that I read was that they enticed Mexicans with things like images engraved of Zapata and things that might entice Mexicans to buy the guns as well. And also, like, following the thread of what Victor was saying, what if we switch the how the US gets involved in other people's business in Colombia and Mexico and Bolivia, in places where they produce coke. What if the Latin American countries were like, you know what? Well, I guess we need to look into how we're going to stop the gun trade coming from the US and how we're going to limit it. Do we? I'm not saying that this is what should be done, but then somebody might think, like, what if we have to bomb these factories so that force them to because that's what the US would do. If it was another country, if it was Mexico, Colombia, or any other country producing guns that were getting into the US and causing the deaths of tens of thousands of people in the US, what would the US do? They'll probably bomb those factories. So,
I'm glad that you bring up and couch it in those terms, because quite often when I find myself debating some folks, when I flip it on them and say, well, what if this was done to us? Because it's inconceivable, right? It's like when we do it, it's like, yeah, but it's always a yeah, but, like, it's like, yeah, but then if I couch it in those terms, well, what if they invaded us? Or what if they did this to us? Or what if they meddled with our internal politics and all of a sudden it was like, whoa, what do you?
It would be terrorism if firearms were getting into the US from elsewhere and causing the deaths of tens of thousands of people. It would be considered terrorism, and it will be dealt with in terms of terrorism. So yeah, Mexico is in all of its right to pursue it legally, and if it was a just world, Latin America would be in the just position to act forcefully to stop it.
To defend itself.
If it was a just world, there would be like 20, not even, there'd be 100 other countries on that list with Mexico doing the same lawsuit. But I like that analogy because it reminds me, like, guns, if someone was, like you said, if there was another nation just handing out guns to people on the streets here in the US, people would flip out. They'd say, look, this is the reason there's so much violence. This is what's causing the violence or whatever. But replace guns with, like, human beings. Because right now there's a lot of Mexicans, Central Americans, South Americans coming up from the south of the US border and coming up through that way, right? You can consider that's basically labor moving from one region to the other. That's the import. That's one of the biggest imports that I would say that the US has when it comes to the southern border. And look at how we're treating, that labor. Look how we're treating those human beings. They're not guns. They're not weapons. They're not weapons made to kill. There's literally human beings searching for better lives. And ICE is probably more efficient now under Biden than it was under Trump, right? The separations are more intense. There was a study, I think, that was done that, like, I think 1 in 5 or some percentage, it's like 15 to 20% of those ICE detainees who are being released are all testing positive for COVID. Right. So we're literally putting people in, concentration camps, immigrant concentration camps. And they're not posing any sort of threat, or they're not threatening our society in any way. They're not causing violence. Right. There's simply the vast majority are looking for a better life. And yet this is how we're treating those individuals. So, just to show the double standard between the U.S. and a lot of Latin American countries, it's pretty it's pretty gross. Because, again, the U.S. is really the root cause of a lot of this violence.
Absolutely. Moving right along, unless you folks had anything else on that particular subject, but one last thing I thought was relevant to bring up. So it has been confirmed, it's official. AMLO, Mexican president, has confirmed that Mexico will host talks between the Chavistas and the opposition. Juan Guaido is basically saying he wants free and fair elections, and Maduro is trying to figure out a way to get the sanctions eliminated against Venezuela and this economic war against Venezuela. So, again, for you leftists out there who want to be overly critical, condemn these revolutionary movements. Again, socialism is not being created in Latin America under ideal conditions, right? And so, do you think that Chavistas, you think that Maduro actually wants to sit down with these motherfuckers? Like, come on, please. He does not, right? He would prefer not to do that, right? But again, Venezuela is in a very precarious position. And the people of Venezuela, right on. The people of Venezuela are suffering not because of socialism, Let's be clear about that again, because that's another talking point that's always used. Again, I check out all the right wing stuff. It's socialism doesn't work. If it doesn't work, then let it fail on its own. But that's not what the imperialists do. So I'll move on, but I'll let I'll wait for your response before I do.
I'll just say is what's his name? Guaido? Is that his name?
Juan Guaido.
Juan Guaido or Guaido? Guaido. Is he involved in these talks?
He will. It appears as though he will be. Remember, he's according to the United States and the EU, he is the president of Venezuela. Seriously, that's who they recognize as the president. This guy's he's not even elected official anymore. He's the president of nothing. He's home chilling like us right now. He holds no institutional power except that he basically has access to certain foreign funds that really belong to the state of Venezuela, right? So he's, it's such an absurd and ludicrous thing. And it's another form of it's colonialism. It's just another form of we're going back, like it's crazy that the West would just hold Venezuela hostage like this. It's just insane. It makes zero sense.
Yeah, and it goes to show like the level of compromise, and this is another point where the Western left don't understand, and some will criticize it because it's too authoritarian, and some will criticize it because it's too lenient with Guaido. But it's the position that they're in. Like, what can they do? And it's ridiculous. How can you be negotiating with this character? He's an opportunist. He's only out for his own interests, and we know what kind of character he is. But and the Venezuelan government is forced to sit down with this guy and negotiate. It's ridiculous, but it has to be done. And that's what they're doing. And not just with him and the rest of the opposition in Venezuela, who clearly are don't have the interests of the Venezuelan people at heart. So it's a difficult situation for them, and fair dues also to Mexico and AMLO. Again, we criticize him a lot for some of the economic policies, which is, I think, in my opinion, fair enough. But in terms of their foreign policy, they're pretty on point when it comes to Latin America, when it comes to Venezuela. Like let them deal with their own issues internally. Stay out of it. Non-intervention is what they call for, and now they're also providing a space for them to dialogue as well. So it shows AMLO again in a good light, at least in terms of their foreign affairs. So yeah.
Absolutely. All right. So the next thing we're going to talk about, and let's see, just a time check. It is 3:56, but let's talk about a few other things. Boom, there it is. Cuba legalizes small and medium enterprises and boost for private sector. Carlos, I'll let you. I'm chuckling. You know why I'm chuckling, but go ahead and I'll let you respond.
Yeah. No. Again, this is just like Castillo. This is another kind of something that's being used in Western media to as propaganda, really. They're saying that the reason why Cuba has now implemented this policy of allowing small, medium enterprises to exist is a direct result of the protest, which is not what's happened at all. This is something that I think the Cuban government had been trying to implement for a while, and they've and it's come to fruition now. Also, to say, when we hear private sector in our context, I guess in the West, private sector is seen as, and rightly so. We know what the private sector is like, just kind of savage capitalist. But private sector in Cuba, is very different, and this shouldn't be seen. And I know the Western leftists are going to be all over this as well, criticizing Cuba for supposedly becoming a capitalist and I guess cowing down to right-wing demands, which isn't the case really. What's really happening here is that and it's not perfect, it's not perfect conditions, but as you were saying, Victor, these aren't perfect conditions for a revolution at the moment, but it isn't like unhinged capitalism. What's going on with this particular policy? There's restrictions. There's certain policies, certain limits that these private enterprises are going to have to respect. Yes, they're not in the direct control of the state as companies in Cuba usually are, but that doesn't mean that they're unhinged capitalists that are going to ruin the island. No, there's limits. There's of course, there's going to be, in terms of like respect for workers' rights, respect for workers' wages, conditions, and so on. Also, in terms of the profit that's made is not like all staying with the private sector. Of course, that's the main point, is that they're developing this policy so that they can generate more wealth, so that they can provide better conditions for the people of the island. So yeah, it's not really something for us to be that alarmed about, as Western media tries to portray it.
Yeah. I think Carlos basically laid it out pretty well. We were talking about this a little bit beforehand, and I remember, we one of the things I was mentioning was that a lot of the when we think about the small and medium private sector in Cuba, you got to think of like mom and pop restaurant shops. And if you ever seen the documentary Cuba and the Cameraman, there was one part where that one guy, I remember, he was arrested, right? There was one guy, a Cuban guy, I forget what his name was, but he was arrested in like the 80s or 90s when the Cameraman was there. And fast forward to the 2000s when the Cameraman goes back, and the guy's out there saying, "Oh, well, now I got a small business," and now like he was selling like construction materials or something like that. And basically what I use that example to basically say that what Cuba is doing is it's opening up more avenues for kind of like small entrepreneurship, I want to call it, but it's not entrepreneurship in the way that we think of it here in the West, where it's like, I'm gonna make a ton of money, like make millions, retire, either sell the company or buy out other companies. Like it's not like that. It's like entrepreneurship in terms of like sustaining yourself. And when we talk about Cuba, when we did all those programs on Cuba, one of the things we always mentioned was that, look, Cubans want more stuff, right? Look, you're living in a blockaded and a economy where you can't have access to basic things. Like I always go back to the example like glue, right? Basic commodities we take for granted. Clean drinking water, right? Some folks, depending on the area, depending on the neighborhood, you don't have that. So people just want more stuff because that's, they want to live decent lives, and the blockade is preventing them from doing that. So Cuba, the government is trying to create more avenues for people to be entrepreneurs, to kind of, make kind of like a side hustle, make some side money, do stuff like that, but not letting it go unfettered and go out of control. I remember I was with someone and we were talking with a Cuban diplomat maybe like 2 years ago. And one of the things he was telling us was he was mentioning basically they had this, and this was during the whole time that they were reforming the Constitution, where a lot of these kind of policies started coming into play with the expansion of the private sector. But we were talking to him essentially about the new law that they were going to pass, which was that Cubans can now own their homes. So you're gonna like your home will no longer be public property, but it'll be like personal property, kind of like private property, but personal property, meaning that Cubans can now buy and sell their homes. They can rent out their homes, that kind of stuff. And we brought up some concerns because me and my friend, or the person I was with, we're both from the U.S., but supportive of Cuba. But we brought up some concerns, specifically the concern of like a big real estate business coming, or real estate becoming a new sector that you have to contend with. And the Cuban diplomat explained very clearly. He said, "Look, we're going to have strict rent controls. We have economists who have been monitoring and been watching exactly how this happens. How you have things like redlining, you have things like gentrification, segregation through housing, even though it's illegal. We've seen how this plays out in the U.S. We've had people study this, and we're not going to allow this to happen in Cuba. We're going to put in, one of the things they have is rent controls, restrictions on how much property you can own, restrictions on how much land you can own, and all of these other very very regulated, very like government regulated policies, specifically trying to counteract kind of petty bourgeois ideology and this petty bourgeois growth that kind of comes with a lot of this privatization. Do I still have some concerns? Of course, because look, at the end of the day, what it is you have the petty bourgeois capitalists trying to find loopholes around the Cuban laws, and then the Cuban government trying to shut and tie up any loose ends and loopholes. So it's going to be a struggle, right? It's going to be a fight, and that's what revolution is, right? But this isn't anything, kind of like what Carlos said, this isn't anything I think that the Cubans are thinking that it's going to get out of control. They know what they're doing, right? They've been studying they have economists, they have politicians, they have the intellectual power to know exactly how to plan things out, right, and exactly how to pursue things. Are there some things you can disagree with? Sure, but at the end of the day, I think what their policies are fairly good, are fairly tight, right? They know what they're doing. They have the restrictions in place. I don't think this is a big thing to be concerned about. The last example I'll give is, there's here in the U.S., I'm sure in a lot of countries they have like historical neighborhoods, right? And neighborhoods where you can't build or you can't change the structure of the buildings in certain ways because it's deemed historical. In Cuba, one of the most popular places to go is Havana, and one of the most popular places for tourists in Havana is Old Havana, right, which is considered a historical neighborhood essentially. And the restrictions on building, the restrictions on what people can do in Old Havana in terms of like building, if you wanted to open up a small business or you wanted to change how your house looks or do this or that, are extremely intense, right? And I use this as just another analogy as to how restrictive and how intense the Cuban government is in terms of not allowing for kind of like private capital or this like petty bourgeois capitalism, which would then go into much larger monopoly capitalism, but not allowing this petty bourgeois capitalism to take over the country, right? In the historical old Havana, where there's tons of hotels, a lot of like, you know, even hotels that you may recognize, like the name brand or the large corporation, they're not allowed to do significant changes to whatever building they own because of just the intense restrictions that the government has. So the government is ready to regulate and monitor and closely watch any kind of enterprise or business that may come up from the private sector, right? So people who kind of fearmonger about, well, you know, maybe now Cuba's a capitalist economy or state capitalist, or, you know, they're being too lenient. Now all the capitalists are going to take over. A lot of people, I think, who are saying that are just fear mongering and aren't aware of just how intense and how strict Cuban regulation and government policies are when it comes to capitalism, because they are very aware of the dangers of reverting back to what it was like before the revolution. And that's something I think people need to keep in mind.
I would also add there, I think somebody in the chat mentioned Alvaro Garcia Linera, the former ex vice president of Bolivia, who has a really good book. I forget the name of it, but basically what he argues is we have the right as Latin Americans to develop as we see fit. In ideal conditions, without a blockade, would the Cuban government be forced to do something like this? Probably not. You know, probably not. They'll probably prefer, they'll prefer to go a different way. You know, a way where maybe the private sector wouldn't exist entirely. Of course, I reckon that would be true. But considering the situation, like, they're in their right to develop their economy as they see fit. And if this is what they see as being a way out of kind of alleviating the conditions that have been brought on by the blockade, then that's on them. That's the decision they're making. And it's not, and we have to stop seeing it as, you know, the decision made by the Cuban government, by the Cuban state, as this kind of like separate entity from Cuban society. No, this is what Cuban society is calling for, and is what Cuban society is deciding through their leaders. So, and you know, the same with China. Like, China's economy is where it is because the people decided that that's where they wanted to go. And it's the same with Cuba. We have to respect them. You know, if we are really for independence, if we're really for decolonization, let the people be. Let the people of Cuba decide for themselves, and that's what they're deciding. So let's respect it and support them. You know,
I don't have much to add to what either of you said, but I will say this, Carlos, you said this isn't new, and this is certainly not a result of the protest. When Raul came into power, they were already talking about it then. So this is years of conversations and debates that have been had in the Cuban society. So that's one thing. Another thing. So you mentioned Alvaro Garcia Linera. He said something a long time ago, which was very interesting. And I've mentioned it before in a prior program where they asked him, you know, are you truly building socialism right now? He goes, no, right now we're not. And he goes, well, aren't you, you know, but you guys are socialists. He goes, yes, we are. Like, all right, explain. He was like, well, in order for us to build socialism, we need a proletariat. Like, he goes, our people are not there yet. Like, we're just not there. We're not there yet. And our people are very entrepreneurial. Like, so people don't want to hear that shit, but it's the fucking truth, right? And here's the other
Victor, sorry to cut you, but even beyond that, like, because I myself believe that, you know, there's Marxist categories. Like, I don't think we necessarily need a proletariat as Marx and the, I guess, classic communists would say a proletariat is, like an industrial proletariat. Not necessarily, though. You know, in some conditions, yeah, it's easier that way. But beyond that, what Garcia Linera also says is, we have the right to not be fucking hungry.
Right.
And if this is how if this is our only option right now to feed our people, to at least have the most basic minimal human conditions met, this is how we're gonna do it. And get the fuck out of our way, because when Europe and the West does it, nobody says shit to them. When the lefties in the West are benefiting from, at least here in the UK, benefiting from free healthcare, paid via imperialist business, they don't say shit because they're benefiting from it. So Garcia Linera says, you guys do your thing and let us develop as we can right now. So yeah, it's a bit of both. Like, yeah, we need the right conditions in terms of a proletariat, yes, but also even beyond that, we need, at least in Latin America, where people are going hungry. How can you be thinking about revolution when you're hungry? And that's I think what Garcia Linera and also other revolutionaries, Chavez and Fidel, they've all said the thing. How are we going to try and create a revolution when the people are hungry? They're not going to listen to you. It's BS. So yeah.
Right. So and 100% well put. I will say this. I do think a couple things. And I've been thinking, I've been having a few conversations with some folks. When we think about China and we think about building socialism in Latin America, we do have to consider a couple things. We obviously have a lot of raw materials, natural resources. We have labor, right? We do need to start thinking about increasing our productive forces and figuring out a way. And again, I know people don't want to hear this shit in the left. I don't care. But we do need. And again, you're playing chess. You're playing long-term chess. If we were to have more companies in Latin America that we could eventually long-term take over, but just initially to be able to increase productive forces, between that and food sovereignty, which it looks like the Nicaraguans have figured out. Now you're really talking. And so, look, again, we need to stop looking at this stuff as like this. We got this cookie cutter approach to Marxist Leninism, and if it's not done that way, then it's not true socialism. It's not true Marxism. Marxist. Come on, we need to stop with the. Am I? Somebody says buffering. So we need to stop with the again with these cookie cutter approaches, and if it doesn't fit this particular mode, and it's just not acceptable. I mean, it's just crazy. But yeah, right on for Cuba to make, they had to make these reforms. I think these things were necessary. This isn't something new. If you've been watching and listening to what's been happening there for years now, they've been saying like the state it's becoming too much. We have to be able to figure out something to get the economy going, and they figured that this would be a step in the right direction. And Nick already mentioned it, Carlos, you've mentioned it. There will be restrictions. There will be looking after this. So I mean, look, we don't have to belabor this, but that I think this should be looked as a good thing. I have full confidence that the revolutionary government of Cuba, alongside with the people, they're making the right choices for themselves.
And just one last thing to add to that, going back to Jose Carlos Mariátegui, we create socialism. It's a heroic creation. It's not copied from what the Marxist purists want. It's our Marxism, and this is our Marxism. We create our own path, and you have to respect it from the Cubans. They've actually taken a lot from Mariátegui, and so anybody who wants to criticize Cuba as not following the strict Marxist position and line, I'm sorry, but we're Latin American Marxists, and we follow Mariátegui. Right. We're doing Marxism our own way. We're not doing Western Marxism, Eurocentric Marxism. We're not going to try and apply the Marxism of the Soviet Union. It might have worked for them, but you know, we have our own history, we have our own conditions, we have our own trajectory. So yeah, stop judging Cuba and let them be, let them experiment. It might not work even, you know, it might not work in the end, and they might have to reverse it. But let them experiment. That's, you know,
exactly.
That's what independence is.
Absolutely. So we're at the 1 hour, 10-minute mark. Look, I had a few other things, and just for the sake of time, I think we're gonna sort of end the program here, unless you folks had anything else. I will say this, just on a silly note, because I know we all listen to hip hop. Did anybody catch the Locks versus Dipset thing? Y'all caught it? So let me real quick. My take. I didn't watch it because I never liked Dipset. I thought they've always corny. They had like really dope beats, but like I just never thought they were good rappers, right? You know, as opposed to like the Locks, I know, you know, they're good they're good rappers, good street rappers. So you know, I just saw all the memes all over social media. I saw everybody talk about it or whatever, and then, you know, I heard Jadakiss gave like a crazy performance. But so y'all both checked it out. I didn't want to. I'm not even gonna check it out. I went on it real quick, and I just kind of like went through some of the songs real quick, but I can't sit there for 2 hours and watch that whole thing. But what was your take on all that?
I watched it, and I'm a big fan of Styles P. And the Locks destroyed Dipset, and also like to bring it back to politics. The Styles, Dipset's like super showy, you know, like super brandy, like Jim Jones and Cameron were like the most expensive attire coming out, super superficial, and the Locks comes out like, you know, super casual. Styles P wearing shorts. It looked like, you know, they were just chilling, but the substance, they had all the substance. And I think it's a good analogy of capitalism and socialism, in my opinion. You know, capitalism is super showy, shiny, but no substance. It doesn't really provide anything profound. And yeah, I think Locks completely destroyed them with all the substance. You know, Jadakiss and the lyrics and the content, and also like listening to what they say as well. Like, it might not be explicitly political, but it's real life. You know, the streets and the conditions of poverty and crime and violence, and the reality of the people. Whereas Dipset's like, I don't know what the fuck they talking about.
Right.
I don't know. Maybe it might be because I'm from a different generation, but I like Jim Jones. I like Cameron. But you know, no, I mean, I definitely do. I agree though. Like, Locks was a lot better. They were a lot better. I mean, a lot of those folks still like too. A lot of people still listen to, but you know, a lot of folks are into like the Dipset type of music, like, and not just the type of music, but the style. You know, that's become more common, more popular. But I was, you know, it was interesting. I was talking to someone about not about the versus battle, but about like rap in general, about what Carlos was just mentioning. The difference in the politics you could see just through the clothing and through, you know, the lyrics. But part of it too is you got to think, and this kind of relates back to what I was saying in Cuba. Think about why is it that folks feel the need. And it's not just in the rap community. It's not just in rap. It's in pop. It's just in the culture of being poor. Or being in being poor in the U.S. and being poor in these Western countries, where with all this wealth. Why is it that you see people, you know, get these name brand clothes? You can get rappers talk about getting having a $5,000 outfit and it's all black, right? Why would you want that, right? What makes that any unique from a $10 outfit that's all black? Why wear the chains? Why do all that? Well, you're talking about folks who are coming from nothing, coming from who have nothing. Right. And who it's, you know, I want more material things. Right. Because to me, what I'm told every day is if I have money, if I have material things, I'll be living a happier and a better life. And to some extent, that is kind of true. Right. That means I can get health care. That means I can, you know, buy my mom a house. I could get her out of living in this dangerous neighborhood and get her into a safe neighborhood. I could, you know, provide for my family. I could do this or that, right? And so it's that kind of desire to want a better life that drives a lot of these folks. That kind of creates the culture that I think we see mostly today. That's like mainstream hip hop culture, which is these flashy objects, all these nice cars, and all this, you know, luxury items, all this stuff. That's, you know, that's where it comes from. It comes from it comes from poverty. It comes from the violence of poverty and the desire to actually want more things, just like we see with the folks in Cuba, right? And it's funny because you could really tie a lot of the domestic issues here, you can tie back to international issues, right? And it's really that violence that capitalism causes that creates these cultures, right? These cultures of desire. So me personally, I don't fault people for you know, thinking that way or believing in that and going down those lines. I mean, obviously I disagree with them. I would never live that lifestyle. That's just not what I like. But I can't fault others for doing that, because it's like, I understand. I can see where you're coming from, right? It makes sense to me.
Yeah, and I'll backtrack a little bit, because you're completely right, Nick. I hate when people are like trashing like completely like the flashy rappers as well, and I completely agree with you, Nick. Which is, you know, of course they're gonna be flashy and they're gonna have these big chains and spend lots of money on their clothes, because exactly like you say, like these are people that most of them come from poverty, and this is kind of their way of saying, you know what, like I came from poverty, but like, yeah, you know, we wouldn't do it, but you can understand why they would do it, because there's a kind of way of rebelling and saying like, shit, like we didn't have shit and look at us now. So yeah, I completely agree with that. Yeah.
Yeah, it's the struggle. They came out the struggle. They made it better out the other end, and now they want to show off. Bro, it's like the thing we were talking about when y'all were talking about. I'm not sure if you mentioned this. No, you know, Victor mentioned this when we were going to DC for Cuba, talking about how Che walked around with the Rolex wristwatch, right? Well, why did he do that? Because he won that. He got that through the struggle, right? That was won through the struggle. It's you can make a similar comparison analogy to a lot of the folks now, and it's not just rappers. It's just people in the community. Yeah.
If I could say, so what happened? We were on the bus and I was minding my own business, and they were like, you know, somebody was basically kind of like shitting on Che because he was rocking a Rolex, and I said, but do you understand? Do you know how he got that Rolex? And nobody knew the answer. I said, the Rolex was on somebody he executed who was part of the Batista, one of the high-ranking military officials. This wasn't a good person, and so he took it on some gangster shit, like, I'm taking your fucking Rolex. You know what I mean? Like, it had nothing to do with Chet trying to identify himself with the bourgeoisie. And people to this day perpetuate that narrative that, oh, Che in Cuba was rocking a Rolex. He was, after he executed a fucking bastard. Like, you know what I mean? Like, you know, on some gangster shit. Like, so on some revolutionary gangster shit. Now you could say, you know, we can get philosophical about whether that's a right thing to do or not right thing to do. But let's be clear about what happened. You know what I mean? It wasn't like he went somewhere and bought himself a Rolex or tried to get a Rolex because he wanted one and identify himself with like that, you know, the ruling class. No, he executed a motherfucker from the Batista military and said, I'm taking your shit. You know what I mean? So that's when I said that story on the bus, they were like, "Oh, I didn't know." Yeah, like now you know. You know what I mean? That's and you know, it's in his writings. So cut off the capitalist hand and keep his jewels. Yeah, you know. By the way, on some hip hop shit, real quick, I want to see MOP do a versus. I'm a big MOP fan. I've always said that MOP, they're communists and they don't know it. Like straight up. Like if you listen to their lyrics. They've said it in like certain songs like food, clothes, shelter, this, that, and like they're very about like just you know, and then they got the song, you know, talking about running the people's jewels and stuff. Like they're just I don't know, they're communists and they don't even know it. But I want to see them do it.
I say a lot of hip hop is like that. Like you'd be surprised. Yeah. Like you listen to, there's a song here, this guy in the UK is just talking street shit, and you can listen to that song and you think it's very political. Like he's talking about crackers in power, but he's not a communist or a socialist at all, or a Marxist. And it goes back to the fact that oppressed people, because of the material conditions that we live in, that raises our consciousness. It allows us to see unjust shit that happens. You don't have to necessarily read Marx or, profound revolutionary text to understand, at a basic level at least, some of the shit that goes on. And you see that in rap and hip hop all the time. So many songs that, where it will surprise you, like, some, even Jim Jones, and he has like a recent song, what is it, State of the Union, and he's talking about like shooting right wingers and mad shit like that, like, and shit that you wouldn't expect from him, but yeah, it happens. And yeah, I would say it's because of that, the material conditions of the people, like it raises your consciousness.
Absolutely. I'm a little, so Nick, you're 23.
Yep.
And then Carlos, how old are you?
32.
32.
Yeah.
32.
I think we're all at different kind of ends of the.
I'm 41. I just remember, real quick before we get out of here, because now we're running at 1:20. Let's see, an hour 21. But this has been fun. This last piece, I miss the culture itself. When I say the culture itself, like and I heard interview recently where everything's just become about the rap game, if you will, the industry, and it wasn't like that growing up. It was about styles. It was the parties. It was the DJs. It was people coming to school with, with the spray cans in their backpack, like knowing that they can get, either if you're in school, either suspended, or if you're in the street, you can get locked up, trying to bomb,
I think that exists. I think we've had this conversation before as well.
Yeah,
I think it exists.
I don't see it as much as it's not. I'll put it like this: if it exists, it definitely exists at a much smaller scale, because it's not like it was in the 80s and 90s. There's no way. Like, at least I'm in Jersey. I'm in the, and I talk to some people in New York. Like, it's not like how it used. Like, are people? I've asked kids now. Like, is anybody coming to school with cardboard boxes to breakdance? That shit don't happen. I'm telling you, this is what I saw every day. Almost every day. People would join ciphers and start. That probably still happens, but it was when I say the culture, it was the house parties, it was the DJs, it was the MC, and it was bringing the cardboard boxes to school so you can break dance. It was the kids, again with the backpacks, with the spray can. This was like this all the time. It wasn't like a random act it was like that all the time. And it's just, I do miss that, You're saying it still exists.
Now I'm saying certain forms of it. Obviously, the whole cardboard box stuff, probably not. I don't know, but I would say like there's a whole like underground rap that exists that isn't, because nowadays like a whole, one of the main criticisms is that it's so industry, and it's all about like looking towards like becoming famous. But there are artists, and I think we've had this conversation before as well in the group chat, where there are local artists that are underground, don't necessarily do it because they want to get famous, and that talk about real shit still, like things that aren't industry, they're not going to get famous of. And yeah, I think we do have to tune in to some of that stuff as well.
I'm guilty of not knowing who any of these people are. Like I am guilty. I'm somewhat stuck in the time warp. Like,
you know what happens as well? Like, some of them are so good that because they're so good, eventually they do, get picked up and they change their style and stuff. So it happens. It does happen. Even if it wasn't the intention to like get that famous and stuff, it does happen.
Right.
Yeah, and I tend to agree with Carlos, but I would also say that the other thing you got to keep in mind is the technology. Like nowadays, I really feel like you could go from each city to city and you'll find a different local rapper. Like everyone, with the amount of technology, the ease with like just putting yourself out there, advertising yourself, anyone could become anything. Like anyone could become influencer, artist, whatever they want to be. And a lot of the underground ones, or I wouldn't even say underground, they're just more like local. They're not usually signed to any like those main industry corporations. A lot of them are pretty good, and they got pretty good politics. Like Carlos was saying, the politics comes from their like lived experience, and that's it. And it's really straightforward. You know, it's pretty obvious. What I like to do is, you know, I listen to a lot of that kind of rap, and for me, it's you know, it's informative on just how society, kind of like how, you know, Dead Prez and Mortal Technique, they were kind of informing us, and they were putting out politically conscious rap that was educational about, you know, imperialism, about local issues in the ghetto, in the barrios, right? A lot of folks are still doing that today, but maybe not as politically conscious or as politically advanced as Immortal Technique or as Dead Prez were. But they're still doing that, and really they're shedding a light on, I think, issues that are like not talked about so much, issues that are like generational issues that may not be seen as much, right? You know, I like some of the themes that come out so much in a lot of the music I listen to nowadays is just a lot of people who are losing friends, family to just extreme amounts of violence, right? Like levels of violence that weren't even seen a couple decades ago or even last decade, right? This it's, you know, it's things like that come out of like local kind of underground rap. And we talked, I think we had a good discussion about this, like with the M1 when we did that program, and we were talking about like, look, a lot of the mainstream rap that's popular nowadays is popular and is like, you know, got these people sign on to labels and on the radio because it's being advertised to middle class and upper class white and even black and brown folks, right? And that's why, yeah, y'all got to go check out a lot of these interviews with these right-wing kids in fucking middle of nowhere. These kids start rapping, bro. Like, I swear to God, like all these white folks, for a lot of white people in the US at least, rap has become like the number one genre. It's become the number one genre nationally, but it's because of white folks, right? It's because of white folks that has become so popular. And so a lot of the music that we hear on the radio and that becomes mainstream is mainstream because it's geared towards the culture and towards what that middle and upper class kind of white population likes, like drugs, copious amounts of, wealth, women, sex, all that kind of stuff, luxurious brands, travel, vacation, all that kind of like material, capitalist bullshit, right? That's what's popular right now because that's the culture. But it's not the only thing that you'll find. I say, you know, because of technology, it's a lot easier for us to find our own kind of niche and find our own little like artist here and there or whatever kind of shit you like or whatever. And it's a lot harder to like find big groups of us listening to only one kind of thing. You know, it's easy for people to get isolated and kind of wrapped up in their own bubbles, but you can find really good shit out there, in my opinion. I think a lot of that rap is still out there. There's still people rapping them, like doing stories, like telling stories through their rap. You could still find that in people today, but it's a lot, you know, it's not popular. It doesn't appeal to like middle upper class folks. It's not going to be mainstream. It's not going to be on the radio.
Y'all guys just calling me old is what y'all doing, basically.
Yeah.
and one last thing, like to go broader than just hip hop and rap as well. Just kind of working class neighborhoods and how you're brought up, gangs and so on. Those are all like because of the conditions that people live in, and a lot of this stuff that these gangs do as well. You know, sometimes it is kind of Robin Hood shit as well, even if they don't do it consciously. Like I know in my neighborhood here in London, growing up, I used to see that kind of shit all the time, where you know you target like certain neighborhoods because you knew that that's where the wealth was, and you wouldn't touch the people in your own neighborhood because you knew they were like your people, and your people are poor. How are you gonna rob from a working class guy coming or woman or whoever coming into your neighborhood from a long day at work at cleaning fucking offices in central London. No, you'd go to like a certain neighborhood where you weren't conscious of like, well, how do these people get their fucking money? You don't really know, but you know there's a difference. There's a class difference at a basic level, at least.
Absolutely. This is an interesting dynamic. So we got like 48 people checking us out, and while we're talking all this hip hop stuff, everybody on the chat is like talking political stuff. Like this is an interesting dynamic. It's like I don't know if they're paying attention to us or they're just or they're in the chat.
I don't think they're here for a hip hop breakdown.
Yeah. So it's an interesting dynamic. But
that could be a program. That could be a show. That could be a whole show.
Absolutely. Now, but we listen. In all seriousness, we do appreciate y'all. Now, I know you folks in the chat started debating about China and whatnot. I will defend China. Let me just say very clearly, I will defend China. A world without China would be a scary proposition right now. And so that's not to say that we don't have any critiques. But yeah, let's just end the program there. We're at about an hour and 30 minutes. This was a lot of fun. As always, to the audience, we appreciate y'all. Please share, please like, please subscribe, please get the word out. But listen to a lot of Tribe Called Quest lately. Tribe Called Quest, that's one of my favorite groups of all time. Rest in peace, Phife Dawg. But yeah, man, listen, we appreciate y'all. Again, this is a labor of love. We're doing this because we are sincere about this work. We want to get this movement moving, and we're trying to, we're trying to do our part. And so, please consider donating. You can just check in the links where you can donate. Great episode, gentlemen. Thanks for this. Absolutely. So please consider donating. And until next week, we'll see y'all then. Again, please continue to support us. Salute.
Take care, comrades.